What if um, royal women had breeded with a controversial man when he was a boy? What if? Um, and what are the implications of that? And what if he? What if it was an African American basketball player from the NBA, and he had many women in Africa, and let's say it was a uh, like the guy who jumps over a car, a handsome, almost white African American man. He's really rugged and strong, and then he's got a lot of money, and he takes a lot of wives in Africa, and he's got like a huge number of wives, but he's also got a child with European royal women, and so then people say, hey, there's an African who's an emperor because he's got so many children. And well, first of all, European society is more about institutions of government, and they maintain the royal traditions and the royal families for the sake of tradition. But it's almost I used the word ornamental, and I said I thought they were ornamental, but they're actually the head of state of Australia and New Zealand. I said I thought the British royals were an ornament, it's a tough word to use. Maybe it's an insulting word. I'm not trying to be insulting, but I thought the British royal house was ornamental because they said it was a constitutional monarchy, and they didn't have their empire because they said the British Empire is something from history. Well, no, it's existing today. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, they don't have a president. They only have a prime minister. And that's like the British prime minister, the first minister to their majesty, whoever it is. Now it's Charles, Emperor Charles. It's an empire. But those ties of government as the hierarchical relationships between Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the UK are they make the UK influential, but they're not exactly being ruled from London because Canada cares about what the USA thinks, Australia cares about what the USA thinks, and New Zealand too. Um, they care about what the USA is doing and keeping. The USA is the provider of security for the British Empire, and the British Empire is part of a cultural and linguistic Anglo-American empire, of which the USA is not part of the British officially part of. It's not part of the British Empire, but it's part of a cultural and linguistic empire, a racial and linguistic empire. The English race and the English language, and also, well, Northern Europeans are all part of the what they call ethnically white Caucasians. So, okay, it's almost like being the custodian of a museum, but it's not a museum. It's an ongoing tradition, but it has some aspects of similarity to a museum. So it's almost like being the custodian of a museum, except that it's in motion because it's not as powerful as it was. Okay, it's the momentum of the British Empire that keeps that keeps the continuity of the institutions, the royal institutions, and all their legal system and all their other institutions are connected to the crown, uh, which is the name of their royal institution. But they both have the royal men and the royal women. Not only the royal women, it's easier for the royal women to have breeding partners outside of their royal family, on the side of their royal lineage. And you know that they all do, not just the women, the men do also. They have outside relationships and they have children with their additional wives outside of their royal family. So how important is it really, and does it really make it's a hypothetical question. It sounds like they're trying to entice me to imagine being uh, the emperor of the world, and I was amused by a cartoon. A man says, "Call yourself emperor. You call yourself Rao the Conqueror. Call yourself emperor of the galaxy if you like, but you'll never take an inch of my land. And if you try, you and all your men will die. I promise you." And that was what the guy said. And that was what the guy said to Rao. And I said, that guy's like me. Um, and Rao is like Donald Trump. And so anyway, so then the guy says, "I've turned my body into steel. Now I will crush Rao's troops as if they were insects." Um, so then I thought that was maybe getting to be too scary. A bald man with long hair who looks like the special forces guy from Minnesota. Um, he was the governor of Minnesota. He was in the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Predator movie. Yeah, a bald man with long hair, and he's a warlord. It's a very amusing cartoon, but it's also scary. Anyway, but I don't have the jaw like that guy. So anyway, I had the attitude like that guy, the attitude of invincibility. And then I was accusing Trump of using magic or sorcery against me because he was using illegitimate tactics against me because he couldn't defeat me in the popularity contest. So then he used magical sorcery, like a cyber attack, and sent the warlord flying through the air and crashing through a mountain. Anyway, so that was amusing. But anyway, I'm not claiming to be the emperor of the world because all I have is influence and I don't have power. Having command authority of a command hierarchy, that's power. And having influence, that's not the same thing as having power. And so the world is more and more intolerant of hereditary power and autocratic power, and the world is more and more modernizing itself with democracy. But we see a countering trend lately, a trend countering that with the popularization of the ideas of royal lineages and with the Game of Thrones. Scary. The Game of Thrones was a very scary TV show. And I admired the young women on the show. Three of them I admired. A little petite girl, I was admiring her, and a red-haired girl, I was admiring her. And then in the later seasons, there were more women to admire, and I was admiring others. But nevertheless, the show was frightening. So it might be construed as American propaganda against the barbaric tendencies of royal culture. And it might also be somewhat true. The royal men, sometimes they can get to be mentally unbalanced from their official stature. But the prime minister is actually, this is something that was recently mentioned to me, even though Emperor Charles is the head of state, they say the prime minister in the UK is the head of government. So they say being the head of state, well, is not, they're making an abstraction and recognizing a difference between the head of state and the head of government. The head of government is the prime minister, and the head of government might do things that the head of state disapproves of. And the head of state hasn't got the ability to instantaneously sack the prime minister because there's a big old legislature of people who are concerned with a lot of aspects of government that are immediately at the forefront of their attention, and they are going along with the royal institutions because of momentum, historical momentum, hundreds of years of it. But the prime minister has been strong since even before the USA existed. The prime minister of the UK was a strong office. So they say that's the head of government, which is different from the head of state. And the head of government doesn't always do what the head of state wants. And so sometimes the head of state can manage to use social engineering to sack the prime minister, well, with a series of social engineering operations that make the prime minister suddenly weak. So the prime ministers are not having long tenure like Winston Churchill, because there's not such serious events happening as it was when Winston Churchill was in office. There were big events that were more international that brought the USA in, and the USA required a more a longer tenure. The USA wanted a prime minister in there to be a reliable partner to the USA. So it doesn't. It's not as serious as it sounds. You know that Emperor Charles has secret wives besides Camilla, his official wife, and besides Diane, I think we can imagine that Diane is in seclusion, and I think it would be expected that she's alive, and create a drama to to create more drama around the royal family. I think that Princess Diana is the real queen, the empress of the British Empire, and I think it's even if hypothetically Elizabeth and her husband are still hypothetically alive in seclusion, they are they know that their age is advanced far enough that it has to be Emperor Charles. He's the true. Well, Charles went to America, and it's almost like Prince William is the emperor, because the emperor wouldn't go to America until he was already more like a retiree. So Emperor Charles, well, he seems fairly lucid, mentally cognizant. So he went to America, and then it's on the one hand, you could say he's paying tribute to America, or on the other hand, you could say he's demonstrating authority over America by addressing Congress as a special partner of the USA, and getting special treatment in America. So you could say he's showing power by coming to America, or you could say he's paying tribute. You could argue either one, that he's paying tribute by coming to America, or he's showing power over America and extending his influence further into America by visiting America as if the USA were still a colony. And that was not so aggravating when it was his mother, but it is, I think, somewhat concerning when it's a man instead of a woman. Nevertheless, it is more ornamental. The monarchy is more ornamental. It's almost as if he's the custodian of. It's not a museum because it's active, it's alive, it's in motion, but it has some aspects of historical aspects of it, which have some resemblances to being the custodian of a museum, because most people are concerned with what the prime minister is doing. So he's been showing some power over the prime ministers. A series of them have come and gone. And Keir Starmer seems to be a stable prime minister who has enough charisma. He could hypothetically last a while. We don't know. And it depends on how internationally minded Keir Starmer is, and how much Keir Starmer is going to cultivate his partnerships in the USA. He seems to be his name is a little weird. It's like the Stormer, like the Daily Stormer, like a little bit of. But he's also fairly ethnic looking. He's not like it would be one thing if Keir Starmer was like blonde and Irish and his name was Starmer. Makes you think he's like maybe looking a little slightly like a neo-Nazi if he was blonde. He looks fairly ethnic. I'm not offended by his name. I think it's slightly irritating considering what the things that Andrew Anglin of the Daily Stormer had been writing and publishing. But he seems to be fairly mild, and Keir Starmer seems to be fairly mild and as one would expect a prime minister to be. I think. Well, I think he's okay. He might. I don't. I'm not concerned either way. They find their own equilibrium in London, and they don't look for me to give suggestions. If there was going to be a long-serving prime minister, well, Winston Churchill had a big brain, so he looked a little bit more cognitive versus any of the recent prime ministers that we've seen. So there could, George Osborne looks like he would be the ideal candidate to be the next prime minister. George Osborne looks fairly cognitive, and he doesn't have a funny name or anything. But I think Keir Starmer looks okay. He's not bad. I mean, I don't want to say he looks okay. What I'm saying is he seems okay. He seems like a serious person. But I had suggested before George Osborne should be the prime minister, and that would actually be somewhat difficult for Emperor Charles to endure. And that's exactly how it should be. If the prime minister looks a little bit more cognitive and a little bit more ethnically white versus the king, as they call him, the emperor of the British Empire, George Osborne would be the ideal prime minister. Anyway, so it's not as serious of a thing as it sounds, but they like to use sort of shock and horror, like the TV series Game of Thrones was using a lot of horror and shock to terrorize, psychological terrorism, to see people who are jumpy and fearful of the monarchy. And I was so afraid of Barack Obama, I couldn't find it within myself to be afraid of the British monarchy. And I didn't get agitated until the Americans really put a lot of pressure on me to get me to where I was suddenly, I was like siding with the British and saying that the Americans should not have revolted against the British Empire. And that's what I was saying, because it was such an offense for an African American man to be president of the USA. It was such a shock and such an offensive idea that I was saying that it was a mistake for the USA to leave the British Empire, because here we have an African American man as the president. That's not supposed to happen. Excuse me. So then I started to sense that there was disdain for me in London, and that there was that the British were picking up on American narratives that were disparaging me in London. And so then I said, oh, I don't belong in London. I have to cling to American democracy. And this is after I already said maybe I would hypothetically use the Constitution as a rolling paper for a cigar. That was just when I was saying that it was so bad to have Barack Obama, an African American. I thought he was a man at the time. Maybe Barack Obama's a female. I don't know. It's still not right to have a female. It's not right to have a female as the president. Anyway, it's not sexism. It's because the head of state has to be accountable for whatever he does wrong. The head of state has to be a man, because a man can be put against the wall in front of a firing squad if he does the wrong thing, or he can be tormented and effectively tortured to some extent in uh, in proportion to what he has done wrong as the president. So the head of state has to be a man, because you can't get away with punishing a woman. The most you could do is to punish her husband. If a woman was the head of state, then you have to consider her husband as accountable for her crimes in office. Because there are certain things that chivalry won't tolerate being done to women, and that's how it should be. So the husband of a woman who's an accessory to crimes, that her husband has to be punished in place of her. So anyway, at the time I was bragging, and I was in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, telling them, the British have aircraft carriers too, and they're nuclear armed. The British are nuclear armed, and the British Empire is very powerful. And I was saying this and I was saying also that it wasn't right to throw tea in the harbor, et cetera, et cetera. But then I thought about France, and I said, France has been such a good partner to the USA, long-suffering and a world power, and the glory of France changed my mind. And then I said, I have to go back to American patriotism, because, we have to consider that Barack Obama was, his presidency was not legitimate. I don't know if he's a woman or a man yet. I mean, if he's a woman, it's Michelle Obama who was the president. If Michelle Obama's the male in the couple, I don't know. And it's not unreasonable to speculate when people can be camouflaged as the opposite gender using changes to their endocrine system. So anyway, it's not as people think it's very serious to imagine hypothetically a man having many wives, and that it's very serious. It's a threat to democracy, et cetera, et cetera. No, institutions are more powerful and they have more momentum than people think. The American democracy institutions are not. They're being corrupted by the British in London, but that was only a temporary condition while I was being besieged by liars and psychological terrorists, and a lot of jealous men were organized against me. So then I said, now I'm the number one 1776 patriot. They said, you can't say that. You said you would make the Constitution into a rolling paper for your cigar. And actually, I also said this. If the USA is going to be overtaken by African Americans, I would take the Constitution and say we are bestowing this on the European Union, as the European Union is the hereditary heir of America's government, because we're being overtaken by numerical invasion of immigration of different races, especially a lot of aggression from the African American society. So, and I said we would take the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, of which there's more than one copy of the Constitution. We would bestow them on the European Union to keep them safe and to keep that form of government going in continental Europe, at least. And it's my argument was that our form of government is being exploited by a racial invasion that the African Americans are numerically growing rapidly on because of welfare dependency, and additional immigration that's been coming from the Caribbean and from Africa over the years. And they've also been growing rapidly. And I said that Constitution never was designed to be numerically overwhelmed by a different race. While the whites are like having not big enough families and are numerically dying out, and then we can only hope that there won't be too much influence in the democracy from the votes of additional illegal immigrants from the border of Mexico and also from the border of Canada. We could be completely overwhelmed unless people are more sympathetic to white people and they continue to elect a white president. But that's not reliable anymore. It's not reliable anymore. And so the Constitution turns into what was a document to guarantee our freedom turns into a document to guarantee the freedom of someone else who's an aggressor against us. And then the Constitution becomes a weapon which is utilized against us as the ethnically white people of America. So I guess that's enough for this video. I could go on, I think, but the video is too long.